Welcome, everyone. I am your host, Dr. Felicia J. Lindsay, founder of AGR Book Club. Welcome to Deliciously Lit, the podcast where adventure, books, and cuisine collide. If this is your first time to our channel, or if you've been here before, say hello. I'm back. D-Lit. Now, pour yourself a glass of your favorite beverage, settle in, and get ready for some deliciously lit fun. Hello, we're back for another segment of Deliciously Lit, and this time we have, I know I might say this wrong, so I'm going to have to ask one more time.
I love it. I shall introduce myself. Yes, why do I have to have such a
Beautiful
complicated name? It's Yanina. So, Yanina.
Yanina. And it's so
Yeah.
pretty. It's such a pretty
Oh,
name,
that's
but
very kind of you.
I'm terrible with names, so overlook me. I meet a lot of people every day, and I'm horrible with names. I'm going to get better. But you are a sommelier?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I used to be a sommelier, and I think once a sommelier, always a sommelier. But yeah, as
Mhm.
we were talking before we pressed the record button, I've been doing quite a few bits and bobs in the wine industry these days. So I'm sure we'll get into that.
So how did you get into your field, and what did you like about it? What made you an
Mm.
enthusiast?
Do you know what? So the thing that always I think always reminds me, no matter how expensive a wine I taste or
Mhm.
how geeky I get into crazy things about wine, I started by drinking Blossom Hill Rosé. You know, that everyone listening will know, and it has quite a lot of sugar. I'll be
Mhm.
honest, I don't really like it now. But
Mhm.
the thing is, it's like it's the gateway drug into serious, serious wine. And so I was drinking this rosé, very sweet. But then I'm
Mhm.
like, I actually think I quite like rosé. And so I like the fact that it was opening my doors into a
Mhm.
different alcoholic drink rather than say cocktails. So I started trying to just wherever I could in a restaurant order another rosé. Of course, most rosé and quite premium rosé is actually typically much drier than
Mhm.
Blossom Hill Rosé. So I'd be like, "Oh, I'm not sure. I don't really like this," because I was basically searching. I didn't know at the time. I had no
Mhm.
idea that it was the sugar that I really liked. But as I was drinking more and more, my palate changed. I think, as you get
Mhm.
older, you kinda go more
Yes.
bitter. You go from milk chocolate to dark, maybe you take out the sugar from your coffee, all this kind of stuff. And I started really appreciating things. And so I
Mhm.
started working in a restaurant, and it was a top New York steakhouse, but in Mayfair in London, and they had an incredible wine list. So I got the experience, which I would advise to anybody, that I had to taste all of the wines that they did by the glass at the very
Mhm.
minimum to understand, okay, what do these all taste like? How are they different from each other? So I can at least recommend to customers wines by
Yes.
the glass, not the
Uh-huh.
extensive 300 other bottles of wine, but these like 10 wines, five white,
Mhm.
five red. And although I was rubbish at it, and this is what I always say to people like, no, 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 like just don't. People get so put off, like, no, I can't taste the baked red plum and cinnamon spice. Like, chill out. No, just don't worry. Is it
Mhm.
fruity? Okay, cool. Go with that. So I
Mhm.
remember not being able to smell or taste the things that the sommelier at the time was explaining to me. But I remember tasting the Pinot Noir and it
Yeah.
being lighter and easier and fruitier. And then I remember tasting the Cabernet Sauvignon and it was darker and it was bigger and who knows what else. But I'm like, oh, these are different.
Mhm.
And so then, of course, after that just piqued my interest like, wow, red wine isn't just red wine. Like there's
No.
different types of red wine. Then I was very lucky because I mean, I'm possibly talking to a majority American audience. I got to taste quite soon after Harlem Estate, one of the cult wines of Napa that sells for hundreds and hundreds of pounds.
Mhm.
And I was able to taste that with customers. And then I was like, well, this is very different than a Blossom Hill Rosé. And then everything just merged together. And I found it so fascinating that I
Mm-hmm.
was like, I just need to now start studying this. I want to know why each wine is different. And that's kind of where it started. And all around the world, there is a global qualification that everyone can do. And it's called the WSET,
Okay.
Wine Spirit Education Trust.
Okay.
And you can start at level 1, which is really literally, if you know nothing, they will slowly take you through. And then level 2 is to actually understand the labels. So if
Mm-hmm.
you were to really pick up a Cabernet Sauvignon from, say, Sonoma, but you were to pick up a Cabernet Sauvignon from Australia, maybe
Mm-hmm.
you would be able to decipher, how might these be different, because I can understand. So that's kind of level 2. Then level 3 starts getting pretty intense, but it gets very exciting. And then you'll never stop the learning. That's it. You never stop the learning.
Now, how long does it take?
To do, are we talking all of the levels
Level
of
one, level
WSET?
two, level three. Mm-hmm.
So I never did my level 1 because that is literally if you know nothing. And I was lucky enough to learn quite a lot on the job. But I
Mm-hmm.
do believe, and you can, there are lots of independent schools that are WSET trained as well. But I believe level 1 is simply a day or
Mm-hmm.
2, might be even
Okay.
just a day. It really is really easy. And then there's always there is a test at the end, but it's not that many hours. I know for level 2, because that's where I started, that was 3 full work days with,
Okay.
a teacher, and they give you a book and you just got
Mhm.
to learn everything in that book. And I believe that the quiz at the end or the test at the end is multiple choice. But the joy of level 2 is that although there's no blind tasting in the exam, you taste a lot of wine, and you're
Okay.
tasting, yes, and you're tasting wine with a teacher. So the teacher is going
Oh.
to say, this is full bodied, and this is
Mm-hmm.
medium bodied, and this has high acidity. And then you can at least be like, is it?
It
but
gives you a
but
reference.
you've got somebody telling you. And I would say that there are lots of wine tastings around, many trade
Mm-hmm.
tastings. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're in the industry, easy, but there are consumer tastings as well. And the best thing you can possibly do is go with somebody that knows a little bit about wine. If you can
Mm-hmm.
find a friend or you can find somebody in the wine industry to go with you, when they're tasting, they're going to say, oh, it tastes like strawberries. It tastes like rose petals. And you can give it a sniff and go, can I? And very often, once somebody says what they can smell, you
Mm-hmm.
think about it, you try and recall it in your memory, and you're like, yeah, okay. And that's kind of a practice. So it's, even if you're not doing these tastings, by
Mm-hmm.
doing the WSET, you have a teacher in front of you, and they're going to give you enough wines from around the world to really start understanding the differences. So that is basically 3 days in school. And by the way, keep in mind that there you can do them all part-time. So
Okay.
and I think you can even do them online now. That's the way the world works. But so if you were doing like 2 hours after work every week, then instead of it being 3 full days, you're probably going to do it over the course of 3 months, something like that. But to read the book and to understand it and to really get to the nitty gritty, my personal feeling would be, once you've done level 1, you need about 3 months to do level 2.
Okay.
3 months, maybe a little bit more. Then level 3, again, it is, you go to school. I went to school for 5 days. So it was basically
Okay.
a week. And so
Okay.
again, you could do it part-time, and they give you a book and read the book. I would say if you've now passed your level 2,
Mm-hmm.
to not stress out too much, you probably need about 3-4 months again to kind of really
Okay.
study, to
Mm-hmm.
absorb it
Mm-hmm.
all.
Mm-hmm.
But that comes with a blind tasting at the end that is part of the exam. So you really do need to calibrate your palate and be comfortable. So everybody, it really is, how quickly do you study, and is your brain in study mode? How long ago did you leave college?
Oh
For
wow.
how long, but because then, if you've just come out of college, your brain's going to be like, yeah, absorb, absorb,
Yes.
absorb. But if you're slightly
Mm-hmm.
older and you haven't done it for a while, you may need a bit longer. Level 4, that's when it gets really insane.
Mm-hmm.
So if anybody wants to get into the wine industry, or
Mm-hmm.
anybody wants to be a sommelier or
Mm-hmm.
do these sort of jobs, level 3 is normally what is required.
Okay.
So really, if you were that determined and you really wanted to get in the wine industry, you could do level 1, 2, and 3 in a year, you know, and you can do it
What
part
is
time.
level 4?
So level 4 is known as the diploma.
Okay.
So I never want to do that ever again. No, it's it is basically considered like a bit like a master's if you
Okay.
after you finish university. So it takes you 2 years.
Okay.
And so you look at subjects in crazy depth. There is a certain amount of time at school. Actually, genuinely, it's all merged together. So I can't remember how many days because, of course, this is
Mhm.
effectively 2 years.
Mhm.
But most of it is also self-study,
Okay.
and there is an exam basically every 3 months. So you have one exam on sparkling wines of the world. You have
Mhm.
one exam on fortified wines of the world. You have one
Mhm.
exam entirely on viticulture and understanding out on the land,
Mm.
exam on business,
Mhm.
and I don't know if I've missed another one. And then the final exam is oh, sorry, yeah, one on spirits. Although I
Okay.
think they might like actually, which I think they've changed now. When I did it, because I did my diploma about 10 years ago, you had to literally do one whole exam on spirits, which was a bit annoying because you're like, well, I love wine and now I've got to learn all about whiskey and vodka. And I kind of don't care about that. Some people, of
Mhm.
course, love it. But
Mhm.
I think they may have actually changed that now because they have a specific spirits qualification. So I'm not sure about that.
Right.
And then the last one, which just is oh my god, is insanely hard, is all the wines of the world. The exam is
Oh,
all the
wow.
wines of the world, and
Mhm.
included in that, of course, with all your exams, you've got specific blind tastings of several wines that
Mhm.
you've obviously got to try and identify correctly. So a lot of the time, you can do it in 2 years.
Mhm.
But for some people, it's just quite a lot. They divert or they don't pass the
Take
exam
a
and they have
little
to do the
longer.
exam again and things like that, you know. And then the only thing after that is master of wine. And I always said I was going to do that. And then I realized that I respected my life enough and I knew enough about wine and I will continue my wine journey by myself. But
Mhm.
master of wine typically takes anything between 4 and 10 years,
Oh.
at least 50 grand. You need
Oh,
sponsorship. You need to
yes.
be able to travel the world. It is just one of the hardest exams in the world, and some people never ever pass. And so I'm like, yeah, maybe when I win the lottery,
Yeah.
I'll quit my job and I'll just do that.
Yeah, that sounds like fun. For 10 years traveling the world, yeah, tasting
Well,
wine, sounds awesome.
if you've got the money, great. If not, and you're
Mm,
working a full time
yeah.
job, yeah, it could be pretty tough. Yeah. Mhm.
Now, my next question is, you have a podcast and
Yeah,
you
I
have a
do.
blog.
Yep.
So, tell us about your podcast and your blog. How did you segue? I know, wait a minute. How did you segue from being a sommelier and
Yes.
being a brand ambassador, then basically doing more on your own, being an independent entrepreneur? How did you segue?
Well, so I got bored, not bored, tired of
Mhm.
working every Friday and Saturday night, which is what happens
Mhm.
when you work in
Yeah.
the hospitality industry.
Mhm.
I was selling on my wine list. So at this point, so we've jumped ahead to the fact that now I'm a head sommelier in a beautiful restaurant called
Mhm.
Beast. So I'd gone
Oh.
from being just a waiter, liking wine and doing some WSET exams to now
Mhm.
being a sommelier. And I got to choose what wines I had on my list. We had about
Wow.
300 wines, all the way up to £6,000,
Wow.
which was fun and
Mhm.
kept me busy. And on the list, I chose a few Chilean wines that I
Mhm.
adored. So anyone who knows me knows that I'm a big fan of South American wine and especially Chile because I think you get great value and not just at the £5 point. It's not about bargain basement. If you were to spend 20, £30, or should I be saying dollars here? But anyway, you can all translate.
That's what
Um,
I was sitting up here thinking. How many?
but if you're going to spend that money, you will get better value in Chile than you will with Bordeaux or Burgundy, the famous regions that have all this history. And so I was selling a very special Shiraz from Ventisquero, premium winery.
Mhm.
And always customers would be like, I want to spend this amount of money. What can you recommend? And I'd be like, look, I'm going to bring you this wine. And they'd be like, oh, Chile, they're spending a decent amount of money and they're expecting probably something from Europe, something where in their head they
Mm-hmm.
think is a premium region. And
Mm-hmm.
I would say, look, if you don't like it, I'll take it back. You don't pay. I will get you something else.
Yeah.
And they would end up like literally like bowing down to me every time I'd walk past during the shift because they were so in love with the wine.
Mm-hmm.
Because with the money that they would normally spend, they would get something that's not as good. So all of a sudden, they'd effectively be massively upgraded, which is why I would say to everyone, never be scared to talk with your sommelier or your wine waiter or someone in a restaurant. And don't be scared to tell them the price. Just be very frank. Look, I have $50. I have $100. I want something. I don't know much about wine, but I want big and juicy, or I don't care what I drink, but I've ordered the fish, like, and so and trust them. Sommeliers aren't there to try and steal your money and upsell you in the way I think that they perhaps used to do or used to have that reputation. Their job is to find you that perfect bottle of wine to go with your food to make you happy for the price you are willing to pay.
Okay.
Anyway, I've gone off on a tangent. I'm bringing it back to the story. I promise. And so Venti Scaro were looking for a brand ambassador. And so I was like, okay, I love these wines. They have been my go-to wines to sell anyway in this restaurant. So I applied for the job and I got it. So I looked after this Chilean winery as a brand ambassador for about 7 years. I
Wow.
then transitioned over to looking after Balfour Winery as their brand ambassador, which is in England. So they are one of the top English wineries. And for
Awesome.
any of your audience to know, first of all, one, Balfour is in the US, and two, English wine is genuinely really good and beating, for instance, our sparklings are very often beating the champagne in blind tasting. So it's really a very exciting time in the UK. So I decided I needed to be bang in the middle of it as this industry grows. I'm still doing that today because I love the fact that an hour from my house is this insanely beautiful estate and vineyard. And I get to see the whole process from when the buds burst on the vine to harvest time when the grapes are picked to, everything in between. So I love
Now,
that
do you
job.
recommend that wine?
Do I recommend it?
Yes.
Oh my God, do I? Of course I recommend it. So Balfour Winery have been around for about 21 years, which is tiny, but the English wine industry's only been really got going for the last 30 years. But they have one of the oldest winemakers with the most experience. They've been very, very specific with what they've planted. It's a very small batch philosophy. So everything's made in tiny little parcels and the quality is delicious. So, it's definitely, there are quite a few English wineries that I can recommend. If people can find Ridgeview, if people can find Nightingale, I'm thinking about the ones that I know are going to be exported to America. Gusbourne is really, really good. Chapel Down, some of their better wines, some of their top wines, their cheaper stuff I don't like as much, but their top stuff is brilliant. So these are the ones I've just mentioned are pretty much the big ones, and I
Okay.
think you can find them all in America, and they're definitely worth trying. It's not a cop out. It's not like, oh, I can't afford champagne. They're about the same price, but they give something different. This is England's version, and we're not worse. Very often we can actually, depends on the wine. Sometimes our wine is better than a certain champagne. So yeah, but I'm looking after them. But in the meantime, because as a brand ambassador, you're only looking after one winery. I
Okay.
love wine too much. Wine is life and life is wine, but everybody drink responsibly.
Yes.
Anyway, and so I had to start doing more and investigating more. I originally started with a YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized I actually had to put makeup on and, had to,
Right.
and
And
I know, right?
there.
Pres- and, and editing that video and also even like the background, you need to, it's a very visual thing. And I realized I cared more about the content and the words coming out of my mouth than actually all of the visuals. And
Mm-hmm.
so then I digressed to doing the podcast, and it's just evolved and grown. And it's become such a joy because I get to speak with winemakers around the world, or I
Mm-hmm.
speak with other sommeliers, or I speak with a wine writer, or I speak with a
Oh.
master of wine. And
Mm-hmm.
so the experiences collectively of all these different people are just
Mm-hmm.
fascinating anyway. But it means that we can touch on all these subjects of the world. So every episode is so different. And then, of course, the blog is the written version, which I'm a bit lazy about doing. Sometimes there's a new blog, sometimes there's not, but there's something there to read, you know. So the point is, it's just about me sharing my love of wine, but
Mm-hmm.
also in a way that doesn't make it alien to people, because wine does not need to be this subject that only certain people can understand or enjoy. So it's about demystifying it and making it for everyone, because that's what it is,
Yes.
you know?
Taking away the intimidation.
Totally. And of course, I started with Blossom Hill Rosé. So how dare I assume just because I'm now drinking my $500 wines, darling, that everyone else is. No, like the average price in England where people spend wine is £6. So, you know, what,
Mm-hmm.
$7.50. Don't know what
Mm-hmm.
it is in America, but yeah, the average person is not spending much money on wine. So but of course, when people understand the difference between, say, a $7 wine and a $12 wine, and it
Mm-hmm.
is insanely different,
Mm-hmm.
because think about the taxes that you pay on wine and the duty for it to come into the country. But
Yes.
then think about the cost of the bottle, the cork, the packaging, the transport cost, the
Wow.
receipt and handling into the depots of which it landed, and the cost of the winery, paying
Mm-hmm.
the people. The juice is almost irrelevant. So basically, once you've added all the set costs that never change,
Mm-hmm.
like we have this calculation. If you buy, so if, let's say if you buy a $6 wine, you're basically getting 50 cents. Is it cents? Yeah, it's cents. You're getting, I'm like, maybe I should go back to pounds and pence.
Go
But
back to
anyway,
Pals. You're
pounds
getting
and pence.
50 cent worth
Yeah.
of wine, huh?
But you're getting, yeah. So then for every dollar more you pay, well, those other costs are still practically the same. So now you're getting $1.50 of juice. So hang on a minute, work out the maths in terms of the quality and the massive difference. For every dollar more you pay, it's getting exponentially better.
You. Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's my job to get people trustworthy enough to get excited enough that actually, yeah, do you know what? Just spend an extra $5 and wow, see what the difference is, you know? And then
Mm-hmm.
once people do that, then actually, then they're on their wine journey, you know? So,
Now, novice like me and others, I drink a lot of wine, but I wouldn't say that I am the most knowledgeable, but I
Mhm.
wouldn't say that I didn't know anything. How would you tell them to start pairing different foods, desserts or a steak, the basics, and how do they properly drink a glass of wine? Now, me, when I started off in college, I mean, you just had a regular glass. But
Uh-huh.
as everything, metamorphs. When I went off to residency, I had to go to drug rep dinners, so I learned more about wine, and so it all changed. But give us the basics. I want my average member to be able to have a little knowledge.
Okay. So, first of all, there are some, I mean, we could go crazy in these complicated details. Or one, what grows together goes together.
Mm-hmm.
Great rule. Really works genuinely. So just
Mm-hmm.
think about that sometimes. Number two, what you need to do is like for like, and that is it. So, first of all, if you are getting a fish and it's a light fish, it's some cod or something,
Mm-hmm.
and most likely what? Have you squeezed some lemon on it?
Yeah.
Okay. So the fish dish is not heavy and the lemon is fresh. So in this regard, you need a wine that is fresh, maybe even lemony,
Mhm.
and light. So you are going to go for a white wine and you're going to go for a fresh wine. And so,
Oh.
without me going into great varieties that people haven't heard of, a standard one would be okay. Sauvignon Blanc. Most people have heard of Sauvignon Blanc. It's not a rich, heavy wine, and it's going to have maybe citrusy flavors. So
Mhm.
that would be perhaps a nice choice. If you're having a steak, you've got a big, fat, rich, fatty, flavorsome piece of meat on your plate. Maybe you've gone to a steakhouse and they've smoked it. So
Mhm.
now you need a full bodied, big, rich red wine. A classic pairing that people love to go with is Malbec. Because actually, if you think about Argentina, they do lots of barbecues, they have
Mhm.
steaks, sorry, well, lots
Mhm.
of cows, and steak and Malbec has always been a great choice. But you could
Yep.
choose Cabernet Sauvignon, you could choose Shiraz. And so, if you're going for a dessert, you obviously have now lots of sugar.
Mhm.
So therefore, you need to make sure that the wine has lots of sugar in it, because if it doesn't, if you drink a dry wine but you have a sweet dessert, the dessert is just going to dull out the wine and make the wine
Okay.
taste really bitter. And so that's when you would want a dessert wine. So you would look for the famous ones like Sauternes from France in Bordeaux, or Tokai, which is another famous dessert wine from Hungary. But there are plenty. And ultimately, when you ask or look on a wine list, there will always be the dessert wine section,
Mhm.
so, and they're normally in a lot of the time in half bottles, because we can't tend to drink as much sweet
Like
wine as we
ports,
can. Yeah.
like
Oh, and again, so again, port is sweet. And so again, port, that's classically gone with things like a cheese board, but
Mhm.
that's because it's not just the cheese. It's you often have some jelly or some quince or
Mhm.
some honey or some loads of grapes and fruit. You add lots of the sweet stuff to go on top of your cheese and your biscuits. And
Mhm.
so, and then port, the reason it goes really well is it has a lovely acidity, so it cuts through protein. If
Oh.
you have a dish that is very fatty, lots
Mhm.
of protein, has butter, has cream, you want a wine that has lovely acidity, because then that cleanses through. And lots of wines do have that. But again, if in doubt, a cooler climate. So if you just know a region that is colder,
Mhm.
that is going to potentially, this is what the sort of thing you might learn in level 2 of WSET. In England, this is the way, this is my easy sell. I'm like, English wine, we're like super marginal, we're one of the coolest climate regions in the world, so we have an abundance of acidity. So
Mhm.
if in doubt, buy English wine, and it cuts through what your creamy buttery dish and refreshes your palate. Yeah, that makes my life easy. But either way, you are looking for balance. If you have a full bodied wine, you need a really intense flavored dish. And the last thing probably to think about is, when you are planning with your dish,
Mhm.
don't just go like, oh, I've got some chicken, I've got roast chicken.
Mhm.
Don't just think, I've got roast chicken, I need to pair to the roast chicken. Think about what are the sides, or what is the sauce, because
Okay.
very often the sauce will be a lot stronger. Like, as an example, I don't know, maybe you would choose Bernaise sauce. Well, now that's quite a strong, herby, creamy type of
Mhm.
sauce. So
Mhm.
now you're like, well, actually, really, I want to maybe go with a wine that's bigger and bolder and creamier. So
Okay.
it's, yeah. So don't feel you have to do it all yourself and figure that out. It is a like for like. If
Mhm.
you do happen to start getting to know the more international grape varieties, then you'll realize, okay, Pinot is lighter, and Merlot is medium,
Mhm.
and Cabernet Sauvignon is full. So maybe then you can be like, when you're doing your steak, go with Cabernet. When you're doing maybe a stew, maybe you want a Merlot. And when you've got something like, I don't know, rabbit or something venison or something leaner, you go Pinot Noir. But
Mm.
maybe just kind of just try and just see, play around with those things. Otherwise, you go into an independent wine shop, you go somewhere where someone knows. And when you're cooking a dish, you go in there and say, I'm planning on cooking this tonight. What would you recommend? There is
Mhm.
so many people that people who work in wine love talking about wine. They want to help you. So you shouldn't never feel intimidated ever about asking somebody to help.
Now, if I was serving wine at home, me
Yes.
personally, I love Riesling. I'm
Oh,
just that's my favorite. But
mm-hmm.
I will drink everything else. I'll at least try it.
Good girl. Good girl.
How would you serve the wine at home? Red or white? Just a lot of people, I've seen people, which is, horrible. They'll put ice in their glass when they're drinking.
Mhm.
So how would you properly serve it?
Okay. First of all, obviously, I'm like, I don't like putting ice in my wine
No, you're
because
letting it down.
it's going to melt and it is going to dilute the flavor. But
Exactly.
mhm, what we want to do, first of all, is you want to be looking at the right temperature. So this is something that a lot of people don't realize, which is that if you've got a really crisp, light, fresh wine, like
Hmm.
white wine,
Hmm.
that's when take it out of the fridge and drink it. So 5 degrees, no problem. So we're talking things like, say, a Pinot Grigio from Italy. That would
Hmm.
be and it's normally crisp. It's not that flavoursome. Again, a Sauvignon Blanc from Marlborough. Again, it's dry and high acidity and normally very crisp. Fine. These ones are good at 5 degrees.
Okay.
But as your white wine gets richer, so if you were to go with a Chardonnay and the Chardonnay has oak, so now we're going to a white wine that's full bodied, and
Hmm.
now the oak is giving you creamy, maybe it's giving you vanilla tones, it might be giving you different spices and nuts and caramel. This is now a big white.
Hmm.
That is actually better served much warmer. And we're talking, and people often get very surprised, at about 13 degrees, because
Okay.
this is a wine that is giving you so much flavor. The colder you have the wine, the less aromas and flavors you can taste. So
Okay.
the bigger and more complex the wine, the warmer you want it. So people are quite shocked that a big, rich Chardonnay should be around the 13 degrees
Hmm.
Celsius. I'm talking in Celsius here.
Hmm.
And then, yeah, I can't do Fahrenheit. So then everybody work that out on Google. So then with your red wines, if you've got a really light red wine that
Hmm.
perhaps has no oak, that means they probably as well don't have as much tannins, and tannins is that drying sensation in
Hmm.
your mouth.
Hmm.
Then it's a really fresh, fruity wine, and that's really good to be chilled. So
Okay.
that's a personal preference how chilled, but very often a really nice temperature to start your reds when they're light is at about 13 degrees. So
Okay.
where you finish with your big, rich whites, you start with your light, fresh, crunchy reds. So an example of that would be maybe Beaujolais. So that's the Gamay grape variety. Beaujolais is the region just below Burgundy. Burgundy. It's kind of still considered Burgundy, but this is Beaujolais and lovely fruity flavors. And so that can be great. Then Pinot Noir, still
Hmm.
quite light, but gets a bit more serious. Maybe that's going to be really nice at 15 degrees. Depends
Okay.
on the actual Pinot. And then your full-bodied red wines need to be served at 18 degrees Celsius. And that's also where people go, what? I thought that red wine needed to be served at room temperature.
Hmm.
But this is before central heating.
Hmm.
And so that was when people lived in caves. Well, not quite, but you get my point. So if the higher you go above 18, the more that the alcohol level will actually stick out and seem more apparent, and the wine might then actually seem more flabby. So the cooler the wine, the fresher it is, but
Okay.
you don't want to go so cold with a really big red wine with tannins, because then the colder that red wine is, the more the fruit flavor would disappear and more the dryness and the tannins and the oak would stick out. So
Okay.
hopefully that kind of explains, based on when you know what that wine is, how rich and oaky and tannic or rounded it is, the
Hmm.
kind of spectrum of temperatures that you would want your wine at. And in terms of serving, for me, first of all, I love a stemless glass. Like, I love the elegance of holding a stem, but people
Mhm.
shouldn't feel that they have to have a glass with a stem. The only reason you need a glass with a stem is because if you had a white wine, it means you're not holding it, so you're not going to warm it up. But
Mhm.
actually, if you're having a dinner and you're sat down, your glass is going to be on the table.
Mhm.
So, it doesn't matter. You're only going to pick it up for a second and put it back down. And secondly, if you have really smelly hands because you've been smoking a cigarette and you haven't washed them or something like
Mhm.
that, by holding onto the bottom of the glass when you're drinking it, then
Oh,
it's going to ruin the flavor.
yes.
But as long as you've cleaned your hands and you're not holding onto the glass the whole time, you just need the important thing you need to get the absolute most flavor is a glass with a wideish bowl, something at the bottom and
Mhm.
tall enough that you can swirl the glass to
Mhm.
aerate it, to get more aromas, to release the smells that have been stuck. Remember, this wine's been stuck in a bottle for ages. We now need to just wake it up. And so you need enough size so you can swirl the glass around that it's not going to spill out over the edge. And you want it to be big and round enough so that it actually has this space to evolve and open up to give you the most flavor. And then ideally, the thinner the lip,
Mhm.
the more delicate the glass, actually, the more you will enjoy the experience because when you put that
Mhm.
thin glass to your lips, it becomes all about the wine and not this chunky thing touching
Mhm.
your mouth, if that makes sense. So
Mhm.
depending on how much you want to spend, it is then up to you. But just those rules: a wide enough bowl, enough space in the top, and thin. And I have a stemless glass, which is from Riedel, and
Mhm.
Riedel are
Riedel, yes, I know. I
they're
have
known
those
as
too.
Ah, perfect. Snap. But they're known as there's many, but one of the top wine glass producers. And you can get these stemless glasses for what would probably be, and some people might go, oh my God, that's outrageous, but probably about $12 to $15 a
Mhm.
glass. But
Mhm.
the thing is, if you're really interested and you're drinking a glass of wine at dinner a night, and you think, you know what, I want to appreciate this, you're not going to it's less likely to be smashed because you're not going to knock it down, and when you clean it, they're quite wide and big, so it's actually easy to clean inside, but they're delicate. And yes, you can buy wine glasses for a dollar, and that's fine too. You got to
Mhm.
find what works for you, but I always recommend these Riedel glasses just because I think they always give you the best opportunity to enjoy the wine. They're not super expensive because
Mhm.
I also have some other glasses that are about $50 a glass, which are really painful when you smash. But these ones I use every day, just standard. And I only bring out the really fancy ones for a really fancy wine, you know?
Now, I tell you, I've tasted different flavors, drinking different wines in different places, but I never thought about all the things that you said went into it.
Mm,
And that's why I
mm.
tasted different flavors. I never thought about that. I just know
Oh,
I would be like, oh,
mhm.
I went here and that was awesome. But I never thought what went into it. That is awesome. I liked learning about that. That was cool.
Okay. Okay. These little things though, isn't it? Once
Hmm.
you get right, I understand that, and then you can appreciate wine just that little bit more. One, it will taste better when it's served at the right temperature and it's in the right glass and with the right company. Oh, we forgot that.
Yes,
Very,
got
very important. The
company.
right then yeah, just realizing as well what all these wines have so many different flavors, and it could be because of the grape, but it also could be because of where it is grown. So if it's in a
Mhm.
really hot climate, the same grape might be more jammy fruit or more baked fruit, and more full bodied and more alcoholic. But if it's in a cooler climate, it'll be slightly less alcoholic. It might be lighter and fresher. It could be spicier, and the
Mm.
fruit, instead of being jammy and baked, might be more just fresh and clean fruit. It's very, very different. And then of course in the winery, do they put it in oak? Do they put it in a cement egg? They've become really fashionable right now. Do they put it in a glass demijohn? Do they, what yeast strain do they use to ferment the wine, which might change the flavor or the texture slightly? So oh my God, there's so much stuff that could happen in a winery, and then vintage. You
Hmm.
know, when it rains during harvest, it can affect the wine. Or if it was a really cool year, the fruit won't get as ripe. Or was it really extra sunny? And then, you're going to get really opulent fruit flavors compared to the year before. So, oh my gosh, every bottle that you pick, it depends on what happened in the vineyard. It depends on the year. It depends on what happened with the winemaker in the winery, and of course the grape, and how you feel. Is it sunny outside? What's your mood, and what glass you're drinking it in, and what temperature it is?
Now, what do you think about the wines that they're starting to age in like a bourbon cask or?
Yeah, I mean, there's not that many, but it's interesting because
Mhm.
it's always going to give something, maybe that lick of more caramelly. Maybe give like a little sweeter edge,
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
that why not? And it is cool, but there are also wines that they're like aging under the sea.
Yeah.
People are doing that now as well, and so that's affecting the wine. I think the conclusion there is typically the wine ends up being fresher, and it doesn't age as fast, so it can actually stay
Oh.
fresher. Whatever, this is, lots of people are playing around and different depths in the sea, so I
Uh-huh.
find it fascinating. It just,
Uh,
you know tell me.
no, go right ahead. I'm
I was
listening.
just saying we shouldn't overcomplicate things. I mean, just drink it and see how it feels. But it's nice. It's nice that there's so many different options for us to try wines. But yeah, the bourbon ones I've only ever tasted one or two, so I can't comment necessarily. But they do seem to give that little extra roundness and that little sweetness boost from what I've tasted. Yeah.
What do you recommend as far as if someone wanted to take a wine trip? What places do you recommend?
Everywhere, anywhere that makes wine.
I
Um,
love it. I love it.
uh,
I love it.
right. Well, okay, let's go. Because seriously, anywhere that makes wine is
Mhm.
beautiful. That is
Okay.
literally a rule. So
Okay.
just don't stress. You find out they're a wine region, go. But Napa Valley, of course, for your listeners, I mean, this is the place which has loads of Michelin star restaurants. There's the train. I have not been
Yes.
myself, but of course, the
It's
wines are
beautiful.
phenomenal.
It's fun.
You so you can personally recommend to everybody. It's an amazing trip away. Sonoma next door, if you want it to be a little bit more farmy, less
Mhm.
posh, a little bit more spread out, but that whole area, obviously, of America is where some of the best wines come out. So Napa is fun because it's literally really set for tourists because
Yes,
of
it
the
is.
train. You don't
Mhm.
have to worry about getting a car, which does get in the way. Um, it's true. If I was to think about Europe, if people were going to come, I have to say that probably one of my most favorite regions that I've ever visited is
Mhm.
Tuscany.
Oh,
It's
wow.
Chianti.
Mhm.
Tuscany is just something special. Now, keep in mind, Italy is basically a country, just a mountainous country. It's like the spine that goes through the middle of the country, and it's just
Mhm.
mountains and hills. And that's all you're going to see wherever you are. But Chianti specifically, really hilly. There's beautiful castles and little towns on the top of each hill, and there's the cypress trees, and you're driving and winding around beautiful little forests, and there's the olive groves, and then there's the vineyards. And Italy, the food, oh my god, there are a few places that I have said the food is the best in the world, and Tuscany
Mhm.
is just never disappoints. So Tuscany is definitely, Europe in general is
Mhm.
definitely not set up in the same crazy tourist way that places like Napa are. The
Mhm.
same for South Africa. South Africa is an insane place to go to for the fauna and the flora. And what I would say, comparing, say, so Franschhoek is one of the regions in South Africa, which has a train as well. So
Oh.
you can go to loads of different wineries. And
Mhm.
Franschhoek is about an hour from Cape Town. So it's really easy to get to. And I would compare that so well to Napa because Franschhoek is also kind of there, not officially, but like kind of known for the culinary, the restaurants. The food there is insanely good. So some of the very best restaurants of the whole of South Africa you're going to find in Franschhoek. But the difference is Napa, you need to remortgage your house these days, but you'll have a good time. Whereas South Africa is the most affordable luxury that I can I can't believe. So you're having basically like Michelin star quality food with wines on each course. And it would possibly, in the most expensive restaurant, would
Mm-hmm.
probably be about $80 per person. But some of
Oh,
the other
wow.
fine, yes, but some of the other fine dining restaurants, which are
Mm-hmm.
also just incredible, are like $40 a person. You've done the whole 3 courses, a mouche bouche, little nibbles, chocolates at the end,
Yes.
wine with every course, $40 a person, including tip.
That is unbelievable.
So I have to say, of all the places I visited, and I'm ticking them off, I'm going through slowly, but I do think Tuscany is a really beautiful place for the history, the culture, the elegance, the sophistication, the beauty, the food. Oh my God. South Africa, though, for affordable luxury and the places you can stay, you can do a lot more with your
Mm-hmm.
money. So that is also a really, and of course you can go on safari. They have beautiful, beautiful coastlines. They have beaches that are just half an hour from Cape Town that have penguins on them and they swim in the water next to you. That's cute.
Yes, that's cute.
So that's South Africa really is for anybody, especially obviously your American audience that want to fly and go somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many wine regions close to Cape Town. Stellenbosch is the most famous one, and Stellenbosch is right next to Franschhoek. It's just
Okay.
the reason I mentioned Franschhoek is it has a train. So, just keep drinking. Don't worry about driving, so, but yeah, oh God, I could mention so many places, but just either way,
Mm-hmm.
if it does wine and it's a well-known region, just go, enjoy. You'll have the best time.
That
Mm.
sounds good. That's the best advice. Now, I have one more question for you. What book would you recommend as far as someone want to learn a little bit more, give them a little bit more knowledge?
I have. In fact, if you give me a second, let me just get it from the shelf and I can show you for those
Okay.
watching. Hang on. Right. So, this is one that I love because it's not a book that is specifically for someone who's just getting into wine. Equally,
Okay.
it's not a wine book that is only for professionals, but it is called The World Atlas of Wine.
Oh,
So this is by Hugh Johnson and Jancis Robinson. And the
okay.
reason I love it, if I flick, they cover every single wine region in the world, but there are maps. So it's just
Oh,
really nice to be able to see the map of a right. Okay. And it's geeky, but you don't have to care about the maps. You could just read the almost like the summary of the country. So
oh.
there, if you see there, but it
Mm-hmm.
allows you to really understand a region. And it goes and it lists top producers to try, and there you can kind of. It's a really good reference book. I think if you love pictures and you're
Mm-hmm.
really just getting into wine, something like the Wine Folly book is brilliant. So I would recommend that. But this is more like a great reference book, so you can just you can read and you'll learn so much in just 2 pages about a full region. So it's not crazy detailed, but then because you can see where it sits in the country, you can see if it's really hilly based on the maps, and they've got all altitude, and it's all the meters above sea level is all mapped in. It's really cool to see every wine region in the world in this way. So I really love the World Atlas of Wine, and I very often just flick through and refamiliarize myself with it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if you're just starting into wine, it's not like you can't understand. There's just loads of information, so it's great. It's something just to slowly, just to have on the bookshelf. And when you want to go in, I want to learn more about Leda from Chile, just go to Leda from Chile and decide that that's what you want to look for. So it's not a fun book. It's a great reference book that's also not very boring, in my opinion.
Well, I'm gonna have to pick that up. That sounds very interesting to me. Now,
Yeah,
if people wanted to hear more from you, can you give us your podcast information, your website,
of
and
course. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was like you. I've cut
give
you
it
off.
to me.
I am right in there. So the name of the podcast is called Eat, Sleep, Wine, Repeat, which is, it's what we like to do, right? It's my favorite things, to be honest. So that's the podcast. It's on all podcast apps. And as I said, loads of different people talking on there. And I like to think I have people who've done their diploma. WSET diploma, and they say, oh, these were great recap episodes, or oh, that one was quite geeky. And then I have people who are just getting into wine saying, I loved this episode. I've just gone and experienced Chablis for the first time because you introduced it to me, and I love the way you explained it. So I really think there's a little bit for everyone on every episode. So it's great. So you can find that on all platforms. My website is www.eatsleepwinerepeat.co.uk. And then I'm most active on Instagram. So same old words, but it's at eatsleep_wine_repeat. So anyone listening, honestly, I love it. It makes me feel really happy when I can answer a wine question and help people on their wine journey. So people can send me a direct message or email me, which is Yanina at eatsleepwinerepeat.co.uk. And Yanina is spelt with a J. But yeah, so just contact me, and it'll be my pleasure to direct you and inspire you and get you excited about what to drink next. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Yanina.
Oh, don't try. Don't even try.
Right. Oh my God. Yanina.
Boom. There we go.
Yeah.
Oh, easy peasy.
For coming on today. And thank you for the experience. We'll totally enjoy it. I can't wait to have the members hear everything that you said. You're going to push us to try more wine.
Yeah, you've got to do it. And you know what? If in doubt, just keep on drinking, Just like the fish said, just keep swimming, but just keep drinking.
You have just listened to another episode of Deliciously Lit podcast with your host, Dr. Felicia J. Lindsay. Connect with us at bookclubpublishing.com. Don't forget to get the app, join the Facebook group, subscribe, and write us a review. See you at the next episode.